Hey everyone, Temporal here, and today we are looking at the scores video on the death of Overwatch. What killed it? What happened? So let's see how they did, if they identified the right points or not. Let's see what's going on here. Okay.
Overwatch was once the
They want you to like and subscribe. I did link their video in the description below if you want to go do that.
future of esports.
Our goal is to create the world's premier esport league, where teams and players can thrive for years to come, and fans are made for life.
So they're right, it was at the very top for a while. Even in Korea at their net cafes, it was the top game over League of Legends. Like, there was actually a window, this was pre-Overwatch League, but a window where it was unquestionably on top. And you were looking, oh, it's neck and neck, or it's on top, that sort of thing. So it might not feel like that to people today, especially people who found the game later, but there was a time when this looked like, hey, this could be the next big thing. It made it there, and it maybe could have held, but it didn't.
Blizzard, esports fans, and even casual players, everyone was hyped.
This is awesome. This is incredible.
I said, are you ready?
I'd argue by these finals, it probably wasn't, but hey.
But just a few years later, the hype is gone.
Yep.
And the game might be dying.
It was more than a few years later. Well, he uninstalled pretty early, I would say, actually. XQC there, but that's okay.
Rather do push-ups. I would rather lose weight. I would rather run a mile. Things like that.
Those are all better things than playing Overwatch in some ways. Those are good things to want to do, no problem. Like, Overwatch is fun, don't get me wrong, but don't knock those things, Tim the Tatman.
There's some things I'd rather do than play Overwatch right now in this minute.
Okay.
Because it is boring as F.
And he was probably talking about goats.
Well, dude, there's also a big chance that the OS League is just gonna die completely.
How about you balance your game instead next time?
Oh my god, I hate this game.
Not really sure Loserfruit
So
keeps up
we
with the size
had
of
to
those
ask.
others, but that's okay. So, okay.
Where did Overwatch go so wrong?
Just letting the fans give their.
Let's answer the
fans
question.
Here in the studio, give their opinion.
The Overwatch League was supposed to change esports forever. Between the alleged multi-million-dollar buy-ins, local
Wait, what do we mean alleged? Like, we know they were multi-million-dollar. You don't need to use alleged there. People paid between 20 and 40 million for their buy-ins. That's not really alleged. Now you can say maybe those didn't fully get paid, maybe those were paid over time, like you started with a few million to start and you paid the rest over time in some situations, but those aren't, like, I don't know why they feel the need to protect themselves with alleged there.
game days for city-based teams and the involvement of some of the biggest organizations in professional sports, it really did seem like the Overwatch League was going to be the future of esports. And then, it all collapsed. Poor decisions, neglect, and just plain bad luck torched what should have been one of the biggest esports in the world, leaving everyone disappointed.
Is that really what happened though? Like, we say should have been one of the biggest esports in the world, and I'm not sure that we get to back that up. Like, it could have been driven better, but should it have been one of the biggest esports in the world, or did it have more fundamental problems? Like, it should be bigger than it is right now, yes, but should it have been the king, the top three? I think we need more details for that, because there are some design things about this game that actually make it challenging for this game to do well.
But
Long-term, in terms of long-term engagement.
how did we get here? Because all the way back in 2014, when Overwatch was announced, it looked like one of the most exciting games we'd seen in a long time. Overwatch
This is
promised
AAA
a different
polish.
take on FPS games. It was more colorful, drew some mechanics from MOBAs, and just generally seemed like a new approach to a genre that was often intimidating to new players.
Yeah, no, it did a fantastic job of bringing in players from all across the board and bringing in a lot of more people who were used to different styles of game, who have played other Blizzard type games, people who, weren't the hardcore shooter fans, and getting them in here, which is both good and bad. League of Legends struggles with that as well, where it brings in a very intense player base, and it also brings in a much more casual player base, and these things are oil and water and don't mix terribly well, unfortunately. Now, the very intense player base needs the casual player base for the money to be there, don't get me wrong, but these don't mix terribly well. It gets the casual player base going, oh my god, this is the most toxic community ever, and it gets the very intense player base going, oh my goodness, why are they balancing any of their game for casuals? It should only be balanced for the very top, that sort of thing. Like, they don't work terribly well together, but companies are going to want both of them, and this was always going to be a tricky line to straddle.
And at first, it seemed like Blizzard's bet paid off. 9.7 million players logged on to Overwatch's open beta in 2016.
Okay.
And just a few months after launch, the game had 20 million registered players. Overwatch quickly developed a small, mostly unofficial esports scene, but Blizzard had something bigger in mind.
Blizzard Entertainment is proud to announce the Overwatch League, a global world-class esport league designed from the ground up to celebrate the best of the best on their path to victory.
The Overwatch League promised to revolutionize the future of esports with a city-based franchise format like the NBA or NFL. This was unheard of in esports.
Sure.
But what was even crazier was the alleged buy-in. According to former ESPN reporter Jacob Wolf, Blizzard was allegedly asking for $20 million for each franchise slot in the Overwatch League, backed by major esports teams and huge investors from traditional sports.
That was the point, though. I mean, the point of the $20 million buy-in was to go, hey, we're doing this $20 million buy-in to propel this well past where the game would naturally be based on its small sort of existing professional community, to really push it to the top, but also to go, no, the facilities are going to be good. There are benefits to having an expensive closed league like that. You get to go, no, we can have stadiums, we can have home games. None of this is going to be 2-bit production. It's all going to be top tier. And if you just show up top tier, that can get the fans to be there to, oh, this looks polished, to sort of have a bandwagon effect of, oh, this looks like it's already established, and therefore it is established because people watch it like it's already established. Like, it was a big gamble in some ways, but it was a big gamble with a lot of the right pieces in play to do it.
Like the Kraft family, who owned the New England Patriots, among other sports teams.
Sure.
We see it as a great opportunity, and what I like about it more than anything is that it's a way to connect globally.
At first, the confidence seemed earned. People were genuinely excited for the OWL. Viewership was solid.
Well, except for the walkout dances. The walkout dances needed to go, but okay.
The venue was always packed, and people seemed to like cheering.
The venue was packed, but it was a few hundred-person venue.
For their home teams. Over 300,000 people watched the London Spitfire become the first ever Overwatch League champions, with 20,000 more fans in attendance.
Okay.
Shots in, taking a jump on the shot, Sato, and he's down! London gets the main tank! Neptuno can't get there to res him. They only need one tick. They are so close. Philly desperate, but there goes Poco, and London Spitfire ignited.
Okay.
They will fly high as your Overwatch League champions.
Back when we had Golden Boy.
Heading out of Season 1, it seemed like the Overwatch League was poised for massive success. But then, everything went wrong.
Okay.
So how exactly did Overwatch go from hyped to hated so quickly?
Okay, so it is important to point out that those fan numbers are relatively real as far as we know at the end of Season 1, and Season 1 was more successful than the investors were anticipating. The teams were pretty open, and Blizzard was pretty open, that Season 1 went better than it was supposed to. Unfortunately, Season 2 did not. It did not get the upwards trajectory.
Well, first, Blizzard seemed to have no idea how to balance their game.
What's up, everyone? This is Jeff here with another developer update to tell you about something super awesome, which is big changes coming for Mercy.
For example, when Blizzard tried to rework Mercy's Resurrect Ultimate, they unintentionally buffed her to must-pick or throwing status. The Mercy meta took over the game, and it's not hard to see why. Just look at Muselk res 3 times in 15 seconds.
Okay.
Ready to go?
I will.
I'm not seeing a kill yet. Hey! Oh, there you go. Hey! And he's back again. There you go. Okay. And then you're back again, boy.
Thank you.
Infinite resuscitation.
That's another
Oh, boy.
That's another res.
Okay, what you got?
Okay, and give me just 1 second, and we're back again, boys.
Okay, that's a little silly. You shouldn't be losing that much. There is something to be said for, unfortunately, Mercy being viable did make a lot of the cast viable. So actually, in hindsight, it may not have been the worst meta in the world. But yes, she was a very powerful hero with a basically 100% pick rate. And she's not a hero that's always had that. That is, has a long history of 100% pick rates. That said, it was still probably a better version of her to exist in terms of healthier for the game than the Mass Res version. The Mass Res version was just bad. She's since been brought down. But hey.
Blizzard nerfed Mercy into the ground after that. But then...
No, they did not. She's still better. She is still better than when she had Mass Res. They did not nerf her into the ground. That is factually incorrect.
They made things worse.
Goats?
Goats.
Goats?
Yeah, she was not nerfed into the ground, even remotely.
Goats.
It's a goat. I think it's a goat.
Can you explain what goats is?
We've talked about goats plenty of times before, but basically, Blizzard accidentally balanced the game in such a way that the optimal comp at a high level was 3 tanks, 3 healers, and no DPS.
No, 3 tanks and 3 supports. Supports are not strictly healers. Let's be careful about that.
The death ball of beefy health bars, big shields, and endless healing ran over
very high sustain and very good peeling.
Or wombo combo
with pretty darn good damage. Not burst damage, but reasonable damage, because supports and tanks don't do bad damage in this game. They just lack some of the finishing power that DPS has.
Any other comp.
Grabs, both ready. Shattering goes around the corner, not gonna be able to find anything though. Shield is up now. Super's gonna have one of his own in just a moment. Sinatra, Grab gonna be online. Answering Shatter, manages to find Sominsu into the front. The Transcendent's gonna be coming down for Twilight, but Sinatra still holding onto the Grab. Answering Grab coming through from Vancouver, locks him in the sound barrier. Sound, gonna be the bomb coming in from Jono. Oh my god, again! He does it again! We saw it from him yesterday to get the victory over the charge. Now he does it to take the win on King's Row.
One of the big problems with this is that Goats was boring as hell to watch. Barely any of the Goats heroes required any actual skill to use beyond timing.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Okay. Lots of issues with that. So, yes, for the average viewer, Goats quickly became boring to watch. Totally get it. I am not going to pull teeth here and be like, no, from a coaching perspective, if you understood Goats, it was actually quite enjoyable and fun. And even the pros themselves were quite fine with playing Goats. The people who weren't okay with playing Goats were specifically the DPS players who rightfully understood that, hey, teams won't actually move us up the ecosystem. They won't move us from tier 2 to Owl or from tier 3 to tier 2 based on seeing our Brig play or our Zarya play, because they keep thinking Goats is going to end, so they keep thinking we're not going to move you up based on what we see here. So the DPS players were getting anxious about, hey, Goats needs to end. From an actual playing Goats perspective at a high level, a lot of players actually enjoyed it. So whatever. From a coaching standpoint, if you understand it, it's fun to watch, but it suffers a lot from something that Overwatch in general suffers from, that this guy hasn't touched on yet at all, which I hope he's going to, which is watchability. Overwatch does suffer a bit from watchability, in that it is not immediately obvious to a viewer what teams are supposed to be doing and who's winning or losing at any given moment. It's not immediately obvious. It's not like basketball or football where you can tell which team has the ball. The team that has the ball, oh, okay, there's nothing quite that obvious. Or, oh, your team is behind in terms of they have more people who have been eliminated or in spawn, but they have worse or better map control, plus there's the ult status. Like, it's more confusing to watch. So totally grant that Goats was not the most fun thing to watch in the world, but I think in general Overwatch has had a bit of a watchability problem. And I'm hoping that he's going to go more into that. In terms of Goats not requiring any skill, that's just like a terrible take other than timing. That is a terrible take. I mean, you could say you could say huge amounts of Overwatch or just timing and angles if you wanted to, but like, oh, it only takes timing. Yeah, it takes timing, it takes positioning, it takes knowing how to rotate your ults, it takes knowing how to decisively go, hey, are we going to go for an overwhelm you type play right now? Are we going to break your aggression? How can we combo our ults to actually get anything eliminated because the sustain is so high? Is self-destruct enough to do it? No, we need to combo it with a bash. Oh, bash doesn't work anymore? Okay, we need to combo grab and self-destruct in order for this to work, and we need to land our self-destruct just perfectly. Oh, turns out you're going to do this and have Zarya bubbles. Okay, what are we going to do to deal with that? Like, GOATS got very, very, very complicated, and it's kind of a terrible take to say it required no skill when everyone can tell you the Shock and the Titans were so much better at GOATS than the rest of the Overwatch League. Like, it was obvious that GOATS took real and meaningful skill. How accurately you can point and click on someone is not the only mechanic in the game that matters, and not the only piece of Overwatch that matters from a skill perspective. That's a terrible take. Super shallow.
Back in the beta, you had mechanically demanding heroes, i.e. you have to click on heads to get kills. You still had that with McCree. You still had that with, Widowmaker, Tracer, these sorts of heroes, right, where mechanically gifted players could shine. But then they kept adding in heroes that could displace. They added in heroes that had barriers.
Needless.
But they always had that. Winston was never a super high-aim hero, and you can say, oh, but Winston has primal mechanics. Fine, but then you get into Mercy always existed, and it was not a super, mechanically demanding hero. Oh, but no, because you have to do super jumps and all this. Those were bugs that they didn't even realize were in the game that they eventually said, fine, they can stand her kit. Like, the game was designed in that way. That was the point of this game that brings everyone together, and some of them you need to let go of as you move up the ladder, and some of them you don't and still have their use. Like, that was the point. Just a little bit of, hey, maybe we aren't going to make aim be everything wasn't the full issue. So I hope we're not going to over obsess on that.
To say, the Overwatch League suffered as a result of GOATS. It wasn't just boring to watch. It also sucked to play, and
No. Randoms didn't like playing GOATS. Watching it for the average person, absolutely boring, totally granted. Playing it for randoms wasn't fun. Playing it professionally with other people who knew what they were doing, again, lots of professional players really didn't mind. Even a lot of DPS players really didn't mind, except for the fact that it was stopping their ability to show off their playing of DPS, which stopped their ability to move up. Like, the actual playing of it was quite fun, to be perfectly honest, in an organized setting. And players, by and large, felt that way. By the end of it, were they a little bored? Sure, but they get a little bored of everything by the end of it.
The player base got bored and pissed.
I would rather do push-ups.
Okay, we saw this clip already.
Lose weight. I would rather run a mile. Things like that. Those are some things I'd rather do than play Overwatch right now in this meta, because it is boring as F.
We do see the Outlaws are going to pull out Dante's Tracer. This has been some of the
things
Outlaws fans have been waiting for is a good
reasonable comp.
Tracer player on Houston.
So for those that aren't aware, it looks like this is a Monkey Goats, a Winston Goats, however you want to think about it, versus Outlaws, who here were trying to not play Goats. They were trying to go, no, let's do something different. Unfortunately, one of the best Goat single hero swaps to deal with more mobile comps, more anti-Goat type things, was just swapping their Reinhardt to a Winston. Gave them a fair bit of ability to shut down this sort of thing, which is exactly what you see Houston's now trying to play into here, and Houston would have been better off probably coming out on regular Goats here and just beating the Monkey Goats. It was not a strictly regular Goats always beats Monkey Goats always beats regular Goats. It wasn't strictly one way or the other. Monkey Goats had a very specific way it had to play into regular Goats, and I would actually argue that regular Goats had the better matchup for winning that fight, unless the map heavily favored Winston Goats. But when Winston Goats was first developed, we really saw it shine in the World Cup that year. Regular Goats teams didn't know how to handle it yet. At this point, where they are now, well, regular Goats teams were pretty okay at handling it.
It's Jake on the far. This combo's worked well for them before, but as soon as they see the defensive setup, they will just simply swap it away. Crucial time lost here for the Outlaws.
I'm just letting the fans give their the fans here in the studio give their opinion.
Well,
You want your team to win, right? They're going to have to play what's meta.
Pro DPS players were left out of GOATs and found themselves out of a job.
That's not really true. Pro DPS players that were good and weren't just good at one or two heroes quickly figured out that they had to be good at Brig or Zarya. And again, it was a problem to move up, but if you were already at the top, you just had to get good at Brig or Zarya. That was the answer. You had specialists, but Pine, who they're showing on screen here, was always a specialist. Pine was never a full-timer. So Pine with his pretty shallow hero pool, Pine really needed to be on those mid or long-range hit scan. He didn't have a good enough tracer to go with it. Guess what? You didn't always in every meta, even in non-GOATS 1, always run a mid or long range hit scan. You didn't always have, the McCree Pine that made sense. So that wasn't really Pine's not getting played. Yeah, Pine didn't get played all that much. He came out for specific maps and specific strategies, even when it wasn't GOAT. So not really a strong argument.
방황을 했죠. 어떻게 보면은 저 혼자 좀 생각을 많이 하는 시간을 갖게 됐었어요. 그때 그러다 보니까 계속 연습하긴 했거든요.
Okay.
근데 뭐 쉽게 기회는 찾아오지 않긴 하더라고요.
And so you're gonna have guys like, Tavik, IDDQD, like all these like pure damage dealer guys.
Mm-hmm.
They're just gonna fall off because you're going to instead lean into the guys who can play the Mei or, who can play.
Sure, but that happens all the time. We have metas, and we see this even with Shock, where it's okay, is it a meta that more leans towards Reinhardt or away from Reinhardt? How much playtime is Super going to get? Super is going to get worse at Reinhardt if you're not in a Reinhardt meta, because he's not going to be able to play Reinhardt as much or as effectively. And what's your point?
Play those kinds of multi-role heroes that get lumped into damage, and then all of a sudden, well, there you are. You're not going to see the damage dealers. You're going to see the Meis. And nobody wants to see the Meis. Sorry. That's just not exciting.
Remember, Overwatch was supposed to be...
Really? There was a lot of hype when you'd get teams like Meta Athena that would come out with sneaky Mei wall strats that would take their whole team to places that the other team wasn't expecting and open up new rotations. There was some hype when Meis came out pre-Owl.
A fresh take on FPS games. But with GOATs, it wasn't even really a shooter anymore. The game lost its soul.
It was never truly a shooter.
That's not all it lost. In 2020, Blizzard cut a $160 million deal with YouTube.
Okay, so now we're moving on to a second point. The first point that they've had so far for how Overwatch failed was balance, and they gave us the Mercy meta and the GOATS meta. Kind of weak, but yes, I do think balance is a huge contributor, and how long GOATS lasted is a huge contributor to Overwatch not staying relevant and Owl specifically not succeeding, though I'd say those are both fine. I would say they're getting to a second thing here, which is going to be, hey, they're moving from Twitch to YouTube. And I think there's something to that. So that's a fair second point to get into. I think that they haven't covered general watchability yet is a big miss, at least if we're talking about the esport.
Moving Overwatch League streams exclusively to that platform instead of broadcasting on Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
Fans hated this decision, and Overwatch League's peak viewership dropped significantly.
And so when you're not on Twitch, all of a sudden you're going to lose that click-through traffic of just people kind of who are idling or doing something else, working, and then all of a sudden it's it's not quite the same thing with YouTube. It's harder to find the channel.
YouTube's gotten a bit better at it, but yeah.
You're not just going to, click into YouTube. I don't even know. There are people that stream on YouTube. I never see them.
It's getting better. YouTube does have its live tab now, but it took forever to get there.
And so that's going to be a frustrating thing. It's like when Facebook was a thing, right? Facebook streaming.
Yeah.
Numbers went off a cliff. Same thing.
Of course.
So when you're not on Twitch, it's going to be, you're choosing a much more difficult path.
So the meta sucked, viewership was in the toilet. What else could go wrong? Well, remember how the Overwatch League was supposed to be a city-based league?
Here we go.
By 2020,
this is a good one.
Still hadn't happened. Blizzard had plans to have teams fly internationally for home and away games, but that just seemed too ambitious for, well, everyone.
Well, according to a report from Upcomer, the London Spitfire will apparently have to travel an estimated 76,923 miles during Season 3. And according to that same report, the Boston Uprising will have to travel an estimated 71,460 miles as well.
Flying all over the world all season long is stressful. And most pros preferred the idea of just staying home all day and streaming on Twitch instead.
Well, sure, but it's not about the pros. Like, any sort of sport isn't strictly about what the pros want. Any sort of business isn't about what the employees want. It's what the market wants, what the market will bear. It's not like the pros' fault. It's Overwatch's fault for not figuring out that, oh, hey, your game schedule may be too ambitious. If you look at things, and this is the same thing that they got into with practice schedules, where you just rolled your eyes at teams that were like, we're going to scrim 5 or 6 days a week, double blocks every day, whatever. And it's like, hey guys, go look at pro basketball. Guess what? They might play 3 days a week. They're not practicing the other 4 days a week. They might practice once a week, maybe twice a week. Outside of that. But they are not doing, yes, we are going to scrimmage, practice game, practice game, practice game. Baseball's the same way. Yes, if they go 3 days in a row without a game, you might see them do a simulated game or something like that. But most of the time, they go, hey, if we're going to play 5 days a week, we're mostly not going to practice. Does that mean they're not going to do any cardio, any lifting, any batting practice? No, but they're not going to do the, we just have to do practice games constantly. We have to do practice, 2-hour practices, 4-hour practices all the time. No. So, like, okay, you didn't need to cave to the fact that the Overwatch League teams were managing their players poorly. You needed to just go, hey, we're going to have this much travel, and you guys shouldn't push your players this hard. You should be like basketball and go, okay, you guys should do a warm-up before your game, sure, but if you're going to be flying for 2 days, guess what? You're not going to get to scrim 8 times or 4 times or 3 times specifically to prep for your next opponent. You're going to have to be like basketball and go, hey, we have a general way that we play the game that we're mostly going to do for the entire stage, and we're only going to really start adjusting to match specific teams when we get to the playoffs. Follow a more basketball model. Follow a more baseball type model. You guys modeled your system, baseball, after how your, Overwatch League versus contenders. You modeled that after baseball, and it's rather obvious that your teams can't figure it out is sort of like on them. You don't need to cave to them. Again, the point isn't to be like, oh, what do we do for the pros? The point is to make something watchable, and you guys were onto something, Overwatch League, with this whole concept of, hey, we're going to have these location-based things because that gives us buy-in, that gives us a reason for people to be fans, even if they don't know a ton about the esports, or to stay fans because, like, hey, there's this location thing to it, just like traditional sports have, just like colleges have, and letting that go was a terrible mistake. Part of that was due to coronavirus, and they couldn't control the fact that happened, and season 1 not being like that was fine. But the ramp up in season 2 into it was pathetic, and there was time to be much further on this way and to be in better shape before things that happened in this world made it an impossibility. And now it'll never happen. And it's sort of like, okay, well, the investments don't really make sense. So this was definitely a nail in the coffin, but it was a self-inflicted wound. Like, there's no reason it had to be like this.
After all, they'd probably pick up more views than the Overwatch League would on YouTube. Players began retiring ahead of the planned home and away game format.
Okay, so now he's getting into the point that they're going to go do other things. And this was always a problem. It was always a problem that there is a viable alternative way for stars to make money, to go, hey, rather than being a star in this game, I'm going to go stream privately. And that's going to make more money than I will make playing in your league. Overwatch League was like, hey, we're going to make sure there's decent salaries, and that was good, that was cool. But the problem is someone like Sinatra, someone like Super, who's not on here because he's still in it. But some of these players are able to go, hey, it makes more sense to go be a streamer. It's a less hectic schedule. Again, part of this is that these teams did not understand the amount of practice that they should actually be doing, and they did way too much practice. I get it becomes challenging because you are looking at the other teams and they're practicing so much, so hard, and you don't want to fall behind, because if you then lose to them when they practice so much, it's going to look like, well, your view was wrong and you were taking it easy. There's this obsession with like, well, I was working hard, and because you were working hard, it's acceptable and respectable and like that sort of thing. No, people don't care how hard you work. They care if you won or not. And like, oh, I was working hard as a defense for having lost. Well, well, no. I mean, I really don't care if you worked. Did you scrim for 8 hours or did you scrim for 1 hour? I don't really care, is the thing. And yeah, scrimming helps, don't get me wrong, but there's this obsession that the teams got into that caused a bit of a problem. A, what I said with like the travel issues, but B, it causes players to correctly evaluate and go, hey, I can stream. It's an easier schedule. It's way less than I'd have to scrim, and I'll make as much or more money from this streaming schedule. This is a thing that mostly pro players in the NFL don't have the option to go do. There's not a place that NFL players can really go, oh, I'm going to just go do this instead. That MLB players can just go, oh, I'm going to just go, I don't know, upload YouTube videos of me doing batting practice instead. That market isn't really there. So it is a harder thing to build a market in, but this was made again even harder when we're looking at the scale of things by the fact that these teams went so hard on their we have to do a bajillion hours of practice.
Many of them moving to Valorant, Riot's newly announced tactical shooter that looked like it was
so
aiming
Riot
for Overwatch's player base.
I think if anything, Overwatch was just like a stepping stone to get here where I am now, because now I'm at.
Well, you have to say that. You have to say that, baby, because you're in this now. You're in this scene now, so you have to say this. But that, like, oh, Overwatch was a stepping stone to get here. But the truth is, it's going to be much like XQC, or much like any variety streamer. And I know he's professional in this now, this sport, Valorant. But like, anything can be your stepping stone into being a more generalist, into being a variety streamer, that sort of thing. And this might be Overwatch to Valorant to undisclosed game of 2024, whatever the case is, to, okay, I'll just go do variety content, whatever the case may be. But like, yeah, you've got to come up through something. It's the same way that we would talk about wealth, where most people would be like, diversify, and yes, diversifying is great, but diversifying, it's true that wealthy people diversify very heavily, and it's true that diversifying is safety. You diversify because it is safety. But most people who made huge extreme gains in wealth went while they were very heavy in one industry. That might have been all of their wealth was in one company that they owned. All of their time was being spent in one thing that they understood. And that's how they climbed. And then they diversified. I am not giving financial advice in this video, but it's very similar in this thing, where you go to the top in Overwatch and you use that to diversify out, like XQC did. He was a big enough name in Overwatch that he could take some of his Overwatch audience and be big enough when he'd start going and streaming something that he could make something show up on the front page of Twitch, or he could be one of the top 3 or 4 streamers in even a popular category when he went and did it, to go get a new audience and move on to the next game and go get a new audience, that sort of thing. This is how this works, and again, you'd use Overwatch for anything. This was always going to happen to some degree. You're always going to lose some people to moving off to the next thing or to variety. It doesn't matter that Valorant specifically came out.
I just feel at home, man. I'm playing a game that's like a hybrid of like CS and Overwatch.
It's easy to say that Valorant is what finally put the last nail in Overwatch's coffin.
No.
But if we're being honest, Blizzard itself is to blame for the game's downfall.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not Valorant that did it. There were always going to be competitors.
When Overwatch came out in 2016, Blizzard was one of the most beloved companies in gaming. Since then, their reputation...
No, Overwatch was so much on a downhill already before Blizzard got tied up in the scandals.
Destroyed by scandals, baffling business decisions, and the reveal that women employees are treated horribly at the company. Balance issues.
Oh, you're every bit as careful in what you say as I am. Okay, YouTube game on point.
And weird league format that didn't end up actually happening because of COVID aside.
No, I'm not willing to grant that it didn't happen because of that. It didn't happen because Blizzard didn't march towards it fast enough. In Season 2, there should have been more than just a couple, hey, we'll hold in like 4 different locations that we'll do a couple games at. It didn't need to be 100% full home and away games by then, but it needed to be moving towards it faster than it was.
A lot of people just didn't want to play Blizzard games anymore.
No. Sorry, that's not true. Overwatch was boring, so when to too many people. So when bad things happened to Blizzard, they were able to go, I'm not playing for that reason. This is nonsense. This idea that like, oh, this bad thing happened at Blizzard and therefore people en masse stopped playing Blizzard games. Sorry. these bad things happened at Riot too. And if you look very recently, Riot went and released their Arcane Netflix series, and League of Legends has been at the top of the charts. It's starting to finally fall away again, but like no. The people will override their morals. They do not have strong enough convictions surrounding these things to not play the games. This is like the tiniest little. This isn't even a cherry on top of your cupcake. This is like one of the individual sprinkles in the frosting on your cupcake. This is very little impact on what happened. Now, it could be a problem for the future in that it caused employees to leave Blizzard, and causing employees to leave Blizzard and causing staff to be too worried about the politics or protecting themselves or getting out or saving their own reputation could cause them to go into a spiral of not being able to fix their game, of not being able to produce good games. But in terms of this moment right now, this is like, again, not even your cherry on top. This is a single sprinkle in your frosting, these allegations and lawsuits.
But Blizzard wants people to remember the good old days of 2016 when they were.
And, another example of that would be, these boycotts that we constantly see. Go boycott this company, go boycott this company. And you'll see like the group for, oh, look, this is the group of people that are going to boycott the next, Call of Duty, Battlefield, whatever. And 98% of the players in that group on the first day are playing the newest game. Well, that didn't work. Very similar thing with this sort of thing.
Hyped for a new Overwatch game.
Monsieur, does this mean Overwatch is back?
Oh yeah, was it? Was it?
Yes. Yes, we are.
That's right. They announced Overwatch 2. But why?
That was a self-inflicted wound.
Why there even needed to be an Overwatch 2 when features are added to Overwatch 1 all the time. They thought it was a money grab, making people pay $50.
That's because it was a money grab, but it may have been a necessary money grab. And yes, I know they could take less profits, but companies aren't going to do that. It may have been a necessary money grab specifically to change their release model to be able to release more content. That said, it'll be a question if they can ever release content at the rate that some of their competitors do, because they go for a higher level of polish than their competitors do on their characters, with unique voice lines, with unique interactions, with the animations. Like, they go for a higher level of polish, and I'm really not sure that they're going to find a model that allows them to release at the speed of others. But we'll see.
Dollars to keep playing literally the same thing with an updated UI.
Dude. You're dealing with the stone cold killer Violet.
Same game.
Overwatch 2 was Blizzard finally delivering the death blow to Overwatch 1. After all, why play the game when it's just a waiting room for the sequel? The Overwatch League suffered too. COVID annihilated excitement for the game because of online play, but now the whole league was blindsided by finding out that they were playing a game that didn't even matter anymore. Not to mention the fact that Overwatch 2 was moving from 6v6 to 5v5 in an attempt to cover for Blizzard's total inability to balance the game. That meant that every franchise was going to have to cut a starting player, and pros were not happy.
Sure. I mean, obviously they're not going to be happy. There's half as many tank jobs.
Wait, you think 5v5 is the solution? How about you balance your game instead next time?
Okay, we're reusing a lot of clips.
The game keeps getting delayed, and somehow they're going to be playing the next season of the Overwatch League on an unreleased version of Overwatch 2, which doesn't inspire a lot of confidence.
Yeah, no, totally with him there. This whole we're going to play the game on a version of the game that isn't released yet, and then the game gets pushed back further. Like, I support the teams entirely in their holding Blizzard's feet to the fire and saying we're just not playing another season of Overwatch League on Overwatch 1. Totally support them on that, because Blizzard was not doing a good enough job of getting Overwatch 2 out. So, like, that makes sense to me, but this should not inspire fan confidence. They've given us a little bit more fan confidence since then, and I've done my video on that of, hey, we are going to delay delay contenders a little bit, but we're going to have just as much contenders as last season, which suggests that they can't actually delay it that long, which also suggests that, hey, this unreleased version that they're going to be using for Overwatch League is something that they think will be stable enough that they can also use for contenders, which is a good sign because it may mean it's, then quickly stable enough or solid enough that they can use it for a more open public beta, that sort of thing. Or maybe Overwatch 2 is closer than the delays suggested. But this was not a good announcement.
For me, if the game isn't ready and the community gets that initial touch and they're not happy with it, that's, in my opinion, really bad for the game, the esport, and potentially Blizzard.
Ultimately, it wasn't one thing that killed Overwatch esports. It wasn't Mercy
Still haven't talked
or
about
Brigida
watchability
or Goats. It wasn't moving to YouTube or planning home and away games. It wasn't charging insane prices to get into a league that few ended up caring about. It wasn't Valorant or Overwatch 2 either. What killed Overwatch was Blizzard.
Sure. I mean, if you have to turn it into one thing, go, it was Blizzard. I mean, that's fine. You could also say Activision. They are the same company. I know people don't like hearing that. That is like, it was the entity that had the most decision-making power. Yeah, they definitely made some self-inflicted wounds. I'll give you that.
It was an avalanche of decisions that kneecapped the game before it could really succeed and become the massive esport its fans knew it could be. But the game is still popular. Casual fans love it, and they always have. There's still a good game hiding under all of Blizzard's mistakes and screw-ups.
Sure.
The Overwatch League is...
This game is the best balance it's ever been, guys. My thumbnail was serious. Like, this game is quite well balanced right now.
Still chugging along, and Blizzard is going to use Overwatch 2 as a fresh start. The question is, can anyone really...
It might break what we have very badly.
Trust them this time.
Thanks for watching.
Okay, so his overall conclusion that it was Blizzard is sort of a cop-out. I think his first conclusion of, hey, it was a bit of a multitude of things had more to do with it. I think what we do talk about is how long we stayed on Goats was a problem. I actually don't think the Mercy meta was that big a deal. I think people complained about the Mercy meta. Totally understand why people complained about the Mercy meta, and don't get me wrong, she was overtuned, but I actually don't think that was a problem. I think people complained about the Mercy meta in the same way that they complained about Dive, in the same way that they might complain about, oh, Hamster is annoying, Doomfist is annoying. I think the Mercy meta was just standard gamers being gamers. They're going to complain about a meta. Yes, she was overtuned, don't get me wrong, but that was no sort of like serious chink in the armor of the health of the game long term. I think how long Goats lasted was a problem. Goats lasted a really long time, and it was something where DPS players didn't get to play, and it was a very hard, or didn't get to play the heroes that, people associated them with, and that was very bad for the ladder community when your ladder is saying, hey, just go Goats, and then doesn't play Goats, right? But it was also very bad for the watchability of Overwatch League. I think, the watchability of Overwatch League, that sort of was a, whoops, we've sabotaged Overwatch League, and that was a problem. I think we've also not covered some things here. Like, this is a little tricky because he didn't really split his video between Overwatch and Overwatch League, which are two different things. If we're talking about Mercy meta, sure, you can get some of that for Overwatch itself. Goat's much, much bigger issue for Overwatch itself. Huge issue for Overwatch League over here, this Goats thing. Mercy was basically a non-issue for Overwatch League. You can talk about the platform move issue. That's an issue not nearly as big for Overwatch League. You can talk about the lack of teams actually going to their locations, which was the point. You can't do the Big Bang. You can't do any of this if you don't then go, hey, we're partnered with big major league sports teams and big esports teams, not, small little esports teams, big name esports teams that can actually afford to do arenas, and then we're not giving people excuses to go into their local city and spend time there with people their age, getting to drink beer and watch an Overwatch game with people their age, which is something that they would have done because they're not going out and watching football games and baseball games. And that's why the football and baseball and NBA teams were willing to invest in this, because they know that people in their 20s and 30s aren't going and doing these things. And they thought they might have for esports. And the thing is, they might have. But Overwatch really was slow with it. But that didn't hurt Overwatch. That only hurt Overwatch League. Might it have helped Overwatch a little bit if they got it right? Yeah, it might have. But if we're going back into Overwatch, we have to talk instead more about the move to YouTube didn't hurt Overwatch the game very much, but roll queue might have. Having to go over to this 2-2-2 thing, that wasn't great for the player base itself. For professional sports, whatever, doesn't matter. But for the actual game itself, this wasn't terribly fantastic, and it also destroyed the ability of DPS queuers to actually stream the game. There's a reason that Super is the biggest streamer. It's because he's a tank streamer, guys. Like, it's not purely because he's a tank streamer. He's got a good personality for it. It makes sense, but he can actually get queues. He can actually queue and get games, that sort of thing, whereas the DPS people have to figure out things to go do between queues when they get to the top of the ladder. In the modern world, you have to be able to stream a game to help keep that game relevant, to help keep people talking about your game, because that is one of the proxies we use to decide, is a game culturally relevant? How much is it being streamed, talked about, watched, that sort of thing. So this was a wound that wasn't talked about here. General watchability is a wound that is big that was not talked about here, and I actually think this is tough. And that's wrong spot. General watchability should be over here. So Overwatch, terrible. Overwatch League. General watchability, huge issue in terms of this is not an easy thing to watch. People with no Overwatch experience have no idea where to watch. It is much easier to watch other esports. You can watch Call of Duty and have some idea of what's going on. You can watch League of Legends and have some idea of what's going on. Overwatch, very, very hard game to watch without any idea what's going on. And they did okay with the casters. I think they did okay with the casters. I think they could have done better. I think they would have done better if they'd found more casters like Jake earlier, but I understand that is hard to do. So, hey, that happened. Other things that we move into in Overwatch, roll queue, 2-2-2 lock, so roll queue again. Balance, definitely, really long, slow balance. And then we get into this lack of deployment, this lack of new content. And this is more Overwatch than Overwatch League in my mind, where we're not getting new content very quickly as competitors come out. As the rest of the marketplace moves on from flavor of the month's balance patches being the way to get people to come back and engage, which is, sort of Blizzard's bread and butter for World of Warcraft era of, hey, I know if people are leaving, let's super buff mages, and now people will come back because they want to play their mage again. And more people will come back than will leave from us having buff mages. And then now let's go ahead and buff demon hunters, or let's go ahead and buff warriors, or whatever the case may be. Well, that could sort of work for Overwatch, except it turns out that the market evolved, the market got more advanced, and the market figured out we can release new champions, we can release new heroes, we can release new whatever we want over there in other games because their games aren't quite as polished and they can do it more cheaply, but they can also afford to do it because people moved in the microtransaction direction. And that makes game as a service a tough thing. So you've really either got to release a really, really polished game and say, no, it's perfect, and we're not going to spend more on it, and we're just going to let it go and be this perfect game that doesn't need balance patches from here, or needs extremely minimal balance patches, which is a really tough sell to your investors, but at least you're not spending more on it at that point. Or you need to sort of release a game that is a little bit less polished, a little bit less graphically pleasing perhaps, but you can keep releasing content for it. You can keep buying licenses like Fortnite does from people to be able to go, okay, let's put in a Spider-Man dance, let's put in a this, let's put in a that. That's, the latest thing that's culturally relevant, let's get that in there. Like, you can go that route too. Then you're spending a lot more money, but you're continuing to make the money too. So you've really got a decision to be made there, and Blizzard sort of down the middle, well, we'll just do flavor of the month balancing, and we'll release a hero once every 3 months, and then not even that was bad. And then, obviously, Overwatch 2 destroyed Overwatch in the fact of it gave them a reason to go, we're not going to release content because we're saving it all for Overwatch 2, but then they, wait the amount of time that, you should, based on this, you're not even going to give us more heroes in Overwatch 2 than we'd have gotten if you'd just been releasing heroes and maps on time. But hey, so that was another thing that did it. So my views definitely differ a little bit from the scores here. I think they hit some of the major things with GOATs. I think they would have benefited from sort of splitting Overwatch and OWL because they sort of treated those like the same thing, and they're really not in terms of what hurt either. If either one had been successful, would it have helped the other? Yeah, it would have. I'd argue Overwatch being more successful would have helped OWL more than OWL being successful helping Overwatch, but I can deal with it. Okay, I will now catch up on chat because I know I've made you guys wait for quite a bit there. Hey Temp, hope you're doing well tonight. I am, Kevin, thank you. Is it dead? Who knows, Ronan. Again, it's the best balance it's ever been, but I won't pretend that player base is terribly large right now. Heaven says, L really does seem like it sped run all the bad ideas of how to run a league when it could have just used real world sports as a background. The thing is, it sort of did use real world sports as a background, but then it, got scared. It flinched. It was like, oh no, we can't do that. And it's like, why not? Why not? Real world sports have had to deal with visas. Real world sports have had to deal with basically all this stuff before. Now, real world sports don't usually go quite as global with their league as they were trying to go, but they could have solved that by going, here's our East Division, here's our West Division, like they started to do, and then go, okay, until you guys get into the playoffs, we're not really going to have our divisions do a ton of cross matches, or we'll do it like a baseball, old school baseball, not modern baseball, where you heavily play in your American League versus National League, and you heavily play in your league, and you only play a couple games outside of your league. Maybe you do one trip over to Europe, or one trip over to Asia, or whatever the case may be, or one trip over to America, and maybe you play 4 or 5 teams there during the season, but then you come back and you mostly played within your league until playoffs, that sort of thing. There were ways to solve all of this. Do I think Blizzard have started listening to YouTubers more than pros? No. I think the only people Blizzard are listening to is themselves, and they're investors, people who already have their ears. I don't think Blizzard is listening to pros. I don't think Blizzard is listening to influencers. I don't think Blizzard is listening to, Twitch, YouTube, any particular platform. I think Blizzard is listening to themselves or people who already have their ear because that's how the world works. I think they have the appearance of paying more attention to influencers right now than they do pros because they would like influencers to help market their game. I think once their game is marketed and Overwatch 2 comes out, if it's successful, they will stop paying attention to influencers again. But I don't think they're really paying attention to influencers. I don't think influencers actually have a serious ability to move things right now. You've had a couple times, like when Seagull really got their attention, that sort of thing has happened, but that was really the biggest Overwatch personality, and it was once, and it was, a drumbeat that had been going for a while that finally got through. Makes Blizzard's Blizzard mistakes. No, what killed Overwatch was Blizzard. Yeah. I agree the game is balanced, but it's only balanced due to lack of heroes being released. Right. Releasing 2 heroes into this game would probably throw the balance out of whack, especially if they release those heroes overtuned, which is generally something that developers do because they want the character that they release to actually get playtime. A, because that's good for marketing, good for getting players there, but B, you also do that because you're never going to tell if your hero is under or overpowered if no one is playing it. If you release it thinking it's a little overpowered, you're going to be able to pretty quickly confirm that. If you release it and maybe it's underpowered or maybe it's overpowered, but it doesn't look overpowered and no one plays it, it could sit there quietly being overpowered for months, years, whatever, but no one realizes it because it seems like it's weak. Wow, really? Over 6 months of Mercy Moth meta full team res didn't hurt the game? 2-2-2 was definitely good for the player base. Okay, so over 6 months of Mercy Moth meta full team res didn't hurt the game. I mean, I think there are people who didn't like that, and it wasn't full team. You don't get Moth and full team. Like, those are different things. You either have Moth meta, where she has Valkyrie, and she can get 2 to 3 reses off, or you have full team res. I think full team res wasn't particularly good for her, but that was how the game was released, and the game was like that for quite a while, where, we did not have very many support options. In terms of Mercy at her most powerful didn't hurt the game very much, I don't think so. No. I mean, I don't think it was particularly good when McCree on release was just this absolute tank buster either. I don't think that was particularly good, but I don't think that destroyed the game. We had Tank Buster McCree, we had McSnipes, we had some early versions of McCree that weren't particularly good. We even had a more recent version of McCree, which was like, dude, why are you the best DPS hero in the game and your only real competition is like BAP for best hero in the game? Like, why are you like this? I don't think that was particularly good for the game either, but I don't actually think that was outside of sort of the standard for games. That's sort of like within the parameters of, hey, this is your game is relatively healthy if you're in these lines, and it was probably running here with Moth Meta. It was probably running here with Overpowered McCree. This sort of thing. Like if this is healthy, whereas again, these are your lines here. These two, I'll do them in different colors. These are your lines here for your game being healthy, and Goats was on the other hand running out here for most of it, and that's not healthy. You're never going to have your perfectly balanced game, and I accept that games are going to have some variance to them in terms of, hey, dive is maybe a little too strong right now, hey, poke is a little too strong right now, brawl is a little too strong right now, that sort of thing. And I think we could have talked more about how after Goats we got Double Shield, and I actually would say Double Shield was probably more painful, especially post Goats for the game, than Moth Meta was as well. Kongik says 222 was definitely good for the player base. Streamers are 0.00001 of the player base. Yes, streamers are important, but without 222, Brig would have destroyed the game even further. I'm not sure I agree. So, here's the thing. DPS players also just left. DPS players themselves also just left because they don't want to wait 15, 20 minutes to play the game. And that's not terribly good either. And I know it's the problem of they weren't getting to before and they were giving us terrible games where they just go Roadhog and now they do that, or we had to play triple DPS and I'm not convinced what we got was better, but I am aware that that is a controversial take out of me, that hey, maybe 222 wasn't the best thing ever. Yeah. Because you did see DPS players leave, you did see it was not good for the streamability of the game. You did see, hey, some strategic depth got lost. That's probably less important, but I don't think that was necessarily the best thing in the world. And it was also sort of the ultimate cop-out of, yeah, we really can't balance our game, which is a problem. I don't think 222 was, by any means the worst thing on the list, though. Not even close to it. Brig would have destroyed the game even further. That's a Brig problem. That's legit a Brig problem, and that they were so gentle on we can't nerf Brig too hard, we can't nerf Brig too hard. We've been going such big swings in terms of our balance of nerf and buff, and the player base got mad at us for such strong buffs and nerfs, so we're now going to start using gentle hands and tiny little nerfs and buffs during Goats, and whoops, we're stuck with Goats. Well, duh, because you had a pretty balanced game, and then you made one huge change, and then you went, now we're only going to do gentle touches, which was incredibly foolish. But hey. Being unwatchable is a result of bad design because visual feedback in the game is so unreliable. Not really. Visual feedback in this game is reasonable for a player. Visual feedback in this game is challenging for spectators. I actually think Overwatch doesn't really suffer from bad design. I think Overwatch suffers from design that wasn't really meant for a single-player game and wasn't really meant for spectators. This game was not designed to be a spectator experience, and it was not designed with a solo queue in mind. It was designed to be a team-based game, which is fine. You could have had an awesome team-based game, but that's not going to be the most marketable thing. That's not what modern players really want. Again, Overwatch was designed with this idea of quick play is what you can go do to warm up, to mess around while you're waiting for your friends. But ladder is something that you sign up for as 6 people as teams. And obviously they didn't actually release the game that way, but that was what they were designed the game to do. And you'll see the game is clearly designed to do that. The synergies are too strong to not do that. No, I do not think that we're in a case of visual feedback being unreliable is really the problem here. I think this is much more in the realm of, it's design choices for your game. Looking for group in the game thing dying also didn't help. Looking for group was worthless. Sure. Do we have any numbers on current player base, or is it all speculation? It's all speculation because what you run into is even when they give us numbers, they're only going to give us numbers when things are looking good for them, and then they're going to give us numbers, and we're going to roll our eyes at those numbers and go, okay, that number is the number of accounts that have been sold. We're guessing rather than the number of actual active players, that sort of thing. So it's like, well, there were this many active players this month. Does that mean that many accounts logged in? So if everyone has 4 accounts, 3 accounts, do we have a third, a fourth, half that many players? What do we have? That sort of thing. And yes, I know not everyone has multiple accounts, but lots of people have multiple accounts. So people just have to guesstimate based on things like, okay, what's the popularity on Twitch? Or how often are they seeing the same player in their game, even when they're playing in the middle of the ladder? That sort of thing. Nice haircut, Tep. Thank you, EMF. How you doing? Mass res was a counter to pressing Q to eliminate 4, but the community didn't want that. The community has always not sort of liked those things. The community also didn't like D.Va's defense matrix as a defensive thing. They didn't like anyone getting rezzed. Now they don't like BAP using lamp to prevent people from getting eliminated. Like, the community or parts of it don't like anything that stops it, that makes it that when they click on people, they don't get eliminated. Be that barriers, be that defense matrix, be that resurrect, be that immortality field. The community is not going to like those things. But some amount and some form of those things are necessary. Be it healing, barriers, defense matrix, boop, stuns, something is going to be necessary. Otherwise, it is just a straight shooter, which isn't what this game is. Yeah. Brig Inspire has almost no visual indicator, which makes it seem less powerful than it is. I'd agree with that, sure. Brig specifically inspires a little light. Still think Overwatch should have taken a hint from League of Legends and done solo queue or solo duo queue and full team queue as separate queues from the start. The mix and match is a nightmare. The problem is, even if you look at League, you're gonna see the popularity of solo is hugely bigger than the popularity of team. People want to be able to play video games like this. And that's unfortunately a bit of a problem. Because Overwatch was not designed with solo in mind. It really wasn't designed that way. It was designed for this, but then of course market forces were going to be like, forget this. You have to make this be in the game. What are you talking about? This has to be here, but the game really was designed for this. And this is why scrims, team play, organized play, the collegiate scene is so much more fun than solo play. And don't get me wrong, you should still do solo play. Solo play is where people work on their skills, get better, but originally that's what quick play was going to be, and the latter was going to be team play only. And that's not what we got. And, again, they could be like, oh, yes, let's have a separate solo and team queue. But I can pretty much guarantee you that what would have happened just in internet culture would have been no one cares about your team rating. They only care about your solo rating. Unless you're winning tournaments, no one cares about your team rating. They only care about your solo rating if both were in the game. If they wanted this game to do sort of what they designed it for, they needed team queue to be the only queue. I totally understand why that didn't happen. It's a fantasy land to believe that could or was going to happen, but we'd have had a very different cult success if this had been what happened over here as opposed to what did actually happen of this solo queue ladder. If they'd put both in, people would go around and only care about the solo ladder, what your solo ladder SR was. I can pretty much guarantee that. A lot of healers have this problem. Don't notice you're healing them and start blaming the support. Sure. Most competitive gaming communities usually don't like things. Make it more work to win. Yeah, pretty much. EMF says, I'm doing well. Just got back to Santa Cruz right now and set up my stuff. Nice. Welcome back to Santa Cruz. So are you guys scrimming this week? I'm probably starting my team back up probably middle of this week here. So maybe we'll get in touch depending on what you guys are doing. But yeah, good to be back in stuff. Hope you guys have some tournaments set up or some leagues that you're competing in, and I look forward to seeing what this new season of Collegiate looks like for us, where we can do some team-based Overwatch. Okay. If you guys have more questions, comments, go ahead and throw them up there. If you're enjoying this content, please do drop a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't done so. And I'll give you guys just a minute to get any final thoughts in there. Yeah, I'm trying to get the guys to fill out their schedules. Yep, new semester, new class schedules. I get it. The UCEI is on the 9th. Oh, nice. Okay, hopefully you guys are warm then. So stay tuned for that. Will do. I don't think I know we're not competing in anything until later this month, like the week of the 23rd, I want to say. So we've still got a little bit of time. But yeah. Okay. Not seeing any more questions, so we'll go ahead and call it there. Thanks, guys. Temporal.